The night was not yet born when the stars began to tremble. In the silence before creation, there was only stillness, a great, unbreathing calm that stretched across an infinite void. From that stillness, something ancient stirred, not a heartbeat, not a whisper, but a question. A question so old it had no language, and so deep it carried the echo of every possible answer. Pause. That question became a shadow, faint, unformed, drifting through the newborn cosmos like dust through candlelight. It did not crave power, nor chaos, nor even existence. It only sought meaning in a world that did not yet know what meaning was, and so it waited. It watched as light came into being. Stars, suns, the trembling warmth of life. It watched as the first creatures opened their eyes and saw the light. But where there is light, there must also be contrast. And in the reflection of every shining thing, there appeared the first whisper of the Lich. He was not yet the Lich, not yet the Deathbringer, nor the end of time. He was the quiet understanding that even the brightest flame casts a shadow. He was the awareness that every birth implies an end, and that every beginning, in its secret heart, already contains its own farewell. Pause. Long before his bones turned to dust and his soul to green fire, the being who would one day be called the Lich was simply a thought moving through eternity. A philosopher in the dark, he drifted among the first stars, watching the endless rhythm of creation. He saw life bloom like coral in the tide of time. He saw worlds rise, civilizations dance, and then fall into silence. And he wondered, why do they build knowing it will crumble? Why do they love knowing it will fade? Why do they cling to warmth when cold is the universe's native breath? These were not cruel questions. They were tender ones, like a child wondering why the moon hides its face. For the Lich, even in his earliest form, was not hatred incarnate. He was understanding without illusion. He saw through the veils of beauty, through the comfort of stories, and gazed into what lay beneath, the steady, inevitable unraveling that gives shape to everything. And yet, there was something sorrowful in his gaze, because to understand too deeply is to lose the comfort of wonder. To see the end in all beginnings is to live in perpetual dusk. Pause. When the first winds moved across the plains of and the first trees reached toward the sun, the proto-spirits whispered of a figure walking between worlds. Not yet flesh, not yet bone. They said he had no face, only the shadow of one, as though the light itself refused to remember him. Everywhere he went, things quieted, not died, just listened. The rivers slowed their songs, the fires dimmed. Even the hearts of creatures grew calm, as if some part of them recognized the truth he carried. He whispered not of doom, but of balance. He said, "Do not fear the end, for it gives birth to peace." He said, "Every silence is a womb." He said, "When you look upon the sunset, do not mourn the light, for the night does not kill it. It merely carries it inward." But few could hear him for long, because to listen to him was to feel time's weight, the slow turning of all things toward stillness. And those who listened too long began to dream of endings. Their hearts grew heavy with the beauty of impermanence. Pause. The Lich did not yet have a name. Names belong to those who wish to be remembered, and he had no such desire. He was content to be the pause between breaths, the dark note in the song of existence. Until the first death came. It was small, a flower wilting under the sun's gaze. But the moment it fell, something ancient resonated. The Lich felt it, deep within the threads of creation, the pulse of conclusion, the sigh of return. He touched the dying bloom and saw, for the first time, the hidden architecture of decay, the graceful collapse that feeds the soil, the transformation that returns life to itself. He smiled. And in that smile, something terrible and divine was born. Death, he realized, was not the opposite of life. It was the continuation of truth, the perfection of it. Life strives. Death resolves. Light burns. Darkness cools. Creation sings. Silence listens, and he, the nameless one, became the listener, eternal. Pause. Ages passed, like ripples in water. The world of Oo began to take shape. Lands, kingdoms, rivers of thought and power. Magic flowed through all things like breath through a sleeping giant. And within that breath, the Lich found a form. Bones gathered around his essence like magnets finding their poles. A skull pale and timeless. Hands like twisted branches, fingers clutching at the unseen. Eyes, or rather green flames where eyes should be. Flickering with the memory of everything that had ever ended. He stood, wrapped in ancient cloth, neither living nor dead, and felt the pulse of the world beneath him. Every heartbeat of every creature was a note in the same endless dirge. And he thought, I am not the destroyer. I am the fulfillment of the pattern. Pause. Many would later call him evil, and perhaps, from their fleeting vantage, he seemed so. For to love life is to resist its fading. But the Lich was not cruel. He was consistent. He simply could not lie about what he saw, that the universe, in all its beauty, was built on impermanence, that joy is only meaningful because it ends. That light is only visible because of the dark. He did not wish for annihilation. He wished for truth without distortion. To him, life's clinging, its endless striving to remain, was a kind of self-deception. He thought, if they could only let go, they would finally rest. He became the prophet of stillness, the philosopher of endings, and so the legends grew. In hushed corners of night, travelers spoke of a figure who appeared before great calamities, not causing them, but observing, welcoming them like an old friend. A witness to entropy? A student of decay. Some said he could be bargained with. Others claimed his words alone could turn courage into surrender. But all agreed on one thing. To look into his eyes was to see yourself fade, not in terror, but in understanding. Pause. He began to wander, through ruins yet to be built, through deserts of time, through the minds of dreamers who feared the dark. He would whisper softly in their sleep, everything ends, and that is its perfection. And some would awaken crying, others would awaken calm, as though some deep weight had finally lifted. For what greater relief is there than to accept the inevitable? The Lich did not desire followers, but those who listened too deeply often became philosophers themselves, or poets, or madmen. They would speak of the gentle cruelty of the Lich, of the peace that waits beyond resistance, and of the beauty of the final silence. His message was never about despair. It was about surrender, and not to death, but to truth. He did not ask life to end. He only asked it to stop pretending it would not. Pause. One evening, in the age before kingdoms, he stood upon a mountain that no longer exists. The wind whispered through his ribcage like a flute. Below him, the first fires of civilization flickered, fragile, beautiful, defiant. He looked upon them and whispered, "They have learned to hold back the dark, and in doing so they have made it sacred." He smiled again, faint and slow, because even he, the Lich, could admire such courage, the courage to love what must be lost. He realized that his existence, too, was part of that balance. Without resistance, endings have no meaning. Without death, life has no urgency. And so he waited, patient as stone, for the world to meet him. For every kingdom, every creature, every star to eventually walk his way, not as victims, but as travelers returning home. He whispered into the wind, I am not your enemy. I am your conclusion. Pause. The mountain crumbled in time. The fire faded. But his whisper endured, echoing through dreams and bones, until it reached the hearts of those who feared the dark. And some began to see, faintly, the serenity behind his horror. For perhaps the Lich was never the destroyer at all. Perhaps he was simply the universe, remembering itself, and so begins our journey into his philosophy. A meditation on endings, silence, and the tender beauty of impermanence. Let the mind rest now in the stillness between breaths, and listen closely to the quiet voice beneath all things, the voice that does not seek to frighten, but to remind, for in the birth of darkness, light first learned how to shine. The wind moves gently through a forest of glass. Every branch hums with a faint, crystalline song, a sound too delicate for mortal ears, a hymn that only the night understands. Above the stars drift like slow-moving embers, their light spilling across the endless horizon of ooh. It is not a light of revelation, but remembrance. Each glimmer, each distant spark, is a memory of something that has already ended. Pause. The Lich stands alone beneath this trembling sky, no longer formless, no longer a question in the void. He now wears the body of eternity's witness. His shadow stretches impossibly far, reaching toward every flicker of light as though seeking to cradle it before it fades. And in that quiet, he listens. He listens to the hum between the stars. He listens to the pulse of the earth far below. He listens to the spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, between breaths. There, in the silence no creature can endure for long, he hears the true language of the cosmos. It is not made of words or melodies. It is made of pauses, as of intervals that define the rhythm of all existence. The Lich, in his stillness, begins to understand that creation itself is a song built upon silence. The stars are merely the notes, the silence, the infinite canvas upon which they shine. Without the quiet, the music of being would be unbearable, a chaos of sound without harmony. Bud pause. He recalls the first dawn, when the world awoke in color and movement. The newborn sun scattered gold upon the oceans. The first creatures sang with voices made of wind and dew. And yet, even in that radiant awakening, the Lich had sensed the hush waiting behind every joy. He had felt it then, as he feels it now, the soft undertone of stillness that follows all creation. He thought to himself, even the brightest song ends in silence. That is the way of all things. But he did not speak this aloud, for he had come to see that silence was not to be broken. It was to be understood. In it lies the wisdom of ages, the breath between birth and death, the pause in which all meaning hides. So he waited, as stars burned and fell, as mountains rose and crumbled, as the earth exhaled civilizations like a dreamer turning in sleep. And as he watched, the Lich began to see that silence was not emptiness. It was fullness beyond measure. It was the invisible thread binding all things together. Pause. A traveler once found him, a scholar of the arcane, seeking forbidden truths. The man had wandered deep into the valley of bones, where the wind carries whispers of forgotten names. He came upon the Lich, standing motionless, his form aglow with the dim pulse of ghostly green. With trembling courage the man asked, "Tell me, Ancient One, why do you wait here in stillness beneath the stars? What do you seek?" The Lich turned his gaze upon him, and though his skull bore no eyes, the scholar felt seen through every layer of flesh, thought, and memory. "I seek nothing," the Lich said, his voice a slow exhalation of eternity. "I listen." "To what?" The man whispered. "To the silence beneath the stars." Pause. The scholar frowned, unsure. "But there is no silence here. The wind howls, the bones shift, the earth groans." The Lich nodded gently. "All sound is borrowed from silence. It is the silence that remains when all else fades that I wish to understand." The man was silent, for there were no answers that could stand before such simplicity. He fell to his knees, feeling the pulse of the world beneath his hands. For the first time he noticed that within the earth's hum was a quiet heartbeat. Not absence, but calm presence. It filled him with both dread and comfort. When he raised his eyes again, the Lich was gone. Only the echo of his words remained, whispering through the bones like wind through reeds. To listen is to die a little, and to be reborn into truth. Pause. The Lich continued his wandering, not through time but through understanding. Each night he walked, the stars seemed to move closer, as though drawn to the gravity of his contemplation. He pondered their quiet endurance, how they burned without complaint, how they gave light knowing it would eventually extinguish them. He wondered if they too knew the peace of surrender. In his still heart, he began to form a philosophy. Light is not the opposite of darkness. It is the gesture of darkness reaching toward itself. The two are not rivals, but reflections. The inhalation and exhalation of the same cosmic breath. Every star that burns is a confession of shadow. Every shadow that falls is a reminder of the light that made it possible. Pause. He looked to the sky and saw eternity folding upon itself, each star a candle flickering in a cathedral without walls. He thought, if the stars could speak, they would not sing of life, but of patience. The Lich began to see that his existence too was a kind of patience. He was not the end, nor the cause of it. He was the waiting between. He was the stillness that allows the story to finish gracefully. To those who feared him, he was death. To those who understood him, he was rest. The difference was only in perception. The eyes with which one gazed into the silence. Pause. There are whispers that sometimes, on the longest nights when the moon hides her face and even the trees seem to hold their breath, one can still hear the Lich's voice carried across the stars, not as words, but as a vibration, deep and endless, a lullaby for those who can no longer sleep. He says, "Do not run from stillness. It is not your enemy. It is the place where your scattered pieces return to each other. Those who dream of him often awaken changed. Some wake in tears, feeling the unbearable beauty of impermanence. Others wake calm, their fears dissolved like mist in morning sun. All carry a strange serenity afterward. The quiet understanding that even in loss there is balance." Pause. One night the Lich stood upon a cliff overlooking a frozen ocean. The ice stretched infinitely, reflecting the heavens above, a mirror of stars upon stars, each reflection slightly dimmer than the last. He knelt, placing his skeletal hand upon the ice, feeling the tremor of life trapped beneath. Tiny fish moved through frozen veins of water, dreaming of warmth. The Lich whispered to them, "Do not despair in stillness. Even silence is alive." The words sank into the frost, into the sleeping ocean, into the dreams of every creature beneath. And for a brief moment, the frozen world shimmered, not melting but glowing, as though the stillness itself had awakened. He saw then that silence was not only the absence of sound, but the womb of transformation. It was the moment before awakening, the space where potential gathers, The Lich bowed his head, humbled by the depth of his own lesson. Pause. Far away, the world of Oo would one day teem with life again. Kingdoms of candy, forests of mystery, towers of glass and flame. But even then, the Lich's silence would remain woven into the wind, into the stars, into the quiet between heartbeats. It would wait patiently for the curious, the weary, the wise, those ready to hear what lies beneath all songs. And those who listened would learn, as he had, that peace is not found in noise or light or endless striving. It is found in surrender, in the gentle acceptance of the rhythm that underlies all being, expansion, contraction, birth, death, sound, silence. The universe breathes, and so must we. Pause. As dawn began to rise, the Lich looked once more at the stars fading from view. Their light was dim now, but he felt no sorrow. He understood that they were not dying, only retreating into silence, preparing to return in another form. He turned away, his cloak whispering across the stone. In his wake, the world felt lighter, as if something heavy had exhaled. The silence beneath the stars lingered, not empty, but full, serene, infinite. And as the listener drifts into sleep, the Lich's final thought echoes softly, like a lullaby made of truth. All things return to silence, not to vanish, but to be understood. Beneath the crust of sleeping mountains and the long-forgotten bones of giants, there flows a river that no map dares to name. It is said to have neither beginning nor end, to move both forward and backward in time, and to hum softly like a creature dreaming of its own birth. Its waters are dark, though not from impurity, rather from memory. Every droplet remembers something, a sigh, a heartbeat, a final word whispered at the edge of sleep. The Lich stands at its shore. The wind carries the scent of age, cold metal, wilted lilies, the faint sweetness of dust after rain. He does not disturb the current. Even his shadow seems reluctant to touch it. For this river, like him, knows too much. Pause. When he first discovered it, the river was not yet a place, but an idea. A current of thought running through the silence of creation. It was the flow of all things returning to their source, the subtle pull that guides every being back to stillness. Over eons that idea took form, and the Lich, its first witness, began to call it the Endless River. He often came here when the stars grew too loud with their burning. Here there were no songs of creation, no cries of life fighting to persist. Only the sound of water folding over itself, soft, ceaseless, infinite, and sometimes, if one listened deeply enough, one could hear voices beneath the surface, and the voices of those who had let go. Tones they did not wail or weep, they murmured. They spoke in languages older than breath, older than sorrow, older even than the stars. They spoke not of what was lost, but of what was found. Peace, release, and the quiet joy of being unbound. The Lich knelt at the riverbank, his skeletal hand trailing just above the water. The current shimmered faintly in response, as if recognizing him. He whispered, "I have come not to command, but to listen." And in that moment the river seemed to dream. It showed him visions, not of endings, but of continuities. He saw the death of a forest giving birth to fertile soil. He saw the fall of empires feeding the seeds of new civilizations. He saw a child burying a flower and in doing so planting tomorrow's garden. The river spoke without sound. Nothing ends. It only changes direction. The Lich closed his eyes. He could feel, for the first time, a faint stirring of what mortals might call emotion. Not joy, not sorrow, but recognition. Perhaps, he thought, even death has its mercy. Pause. Long ago, before kingdoms rose, a hermit lived by this same river. He spent his days writing names on smooth stones, names of those who had passed into silence. Each evening he would toss one into the water and watch it sink, murmuring a blessing. May they drift toward rest. One twilight, as the sun bled into the horizon, the hermit saw the Lich standing across the river. His lantern flickered uncertainly in his hand, though the air was still. "Who are you, traveller?" he called. The Lich's voice, when it came, was like the movement of distant waves. "I am the listener of ends." The hermit hesitated, then asked, "Do you take them, those whose names I send down the river?" The Lich shook his head slowly. "I take nothing. I am what remains when taking is no longer needed." The hermit thought this over. "Then why do you watch the river?" The Lich replied, "To learn what it means to let go without fear." The hermit nodded, understanding in his quiet way. He sat, and together they watched the water move under the dying light. Two beings, one alive, one beyond life, both students of the same eternal lesson, cheese. The Lich watched as the hermit aged, his hands trembling, his voice growing softer. Every day he cast a stone, and every day he whispered a name, until one dawn when the river carried no more stones. The Lich crossed to the opposite bank, where the lantern still burned beside a still body. He looked down and said, "You have joined the current." And as he spoke, the river rose in a gentle wave, touching the hermit's feet as if in gratitude. Then, with a sigh like the exhale of a sleeping god, it carried him away. For a moment, the Lich thought he heard the hermit's voice among the others, calm, untroubled, at peace. And in that moment he realized something profound. Even endings can be beautiful when met with surrender. Was the Lich often returned after that. Sometimes he would stand for what felt like centuries, motionless, while the river dreamed. He began to see patterns in its current, spirals, eddies, reflections that spoke in the language of philosophy. One night, the river mirrored the stars so perfectly that sky and water were indistinguishable. It was as though the heavens themselves had fallen into their own reflection. The Lich stood in the center of it all, feeling the pulse of infinity above and below. He whispered, "This is what the soul must feel when it ceases to struggle, when it realizes it was water all along." The river answered not in words, but in feeling, a wave of serenity that rippled through him, dissolving what little boundary remained between existence and understanding. He saw then that death, too, was a current, not an ending, but a continuation into stillness. Life resists the pull, but the pull is kind. It does not devour, it delivers. It returns every spark to the source that birthed it. And the Lich, ever the philosopher, asked the river a question. "Why, if all must return, do they fear you so?" The river whispered in response, "They forget that they were once the rain." The Lich stood silent for a long time. It was true. Mortals cling to their forms, their identities, their fleeting boundaries. They forget they were once part of something vast, fluid, and eternal. The river does not mourn the droplet. It welcomes it home. He gazed upon the current and thought, perhaps the sorrow of death is not in its truth, but in our refusal to flow pause he stayed until dawn, when mist rose from the surface, blurring the lines between water and air. The world shimmered, fragile and luminous, as though it were waking from a dream. The Lich lifted his head to the horizon and said softly, "The river dreams because it remembers. I dream because I must forget." For a moment he felt almost human, not in body, but in yearning. There was something tender in the desire to remember what it felt like to begin. Perhaps even the Lich, philosopher of endings, carried within him a small ember of longing for the warmth of life. But then the sun climbed higher, and the shadows stretched long across the water. The lich turned away, the glow of his eyes dimming. The river continued its eternal motion, carrying the memories of both the living and the lost. Pause. Sometimes on moonless nights, travelers who camp near its banks swear they hear a voice rising from the current. Deep, slow, patient. It speaks of rest, of return, of peace that cannot be broken. And if they listen too closely, they might see a pale figure standing midstream, motionless, as though part of the river itself. The figure does not threaten. It only watches and waits and whispers, "You are already flowing home." Pause. The endless river continues, weaving through time and memory, carrying even the listener's breath. Its surface reflects both stars and skulls, both laughter and silence. It is the lich's mirror, calm, merciful, unending. As you drift, let its current cradle your mind. Imagine your thoughts dissolving like leaves upon the surface, carried gently, not away, but inward, toward stillness. Let the weight of striving fall away. There is no need to fight the flow. Pause. The lich turns once more to the horizon, his form glimmering faintly in the starlight. He has listened deeply, and he understands now. The end is not a wall, but a curve in the river. And when the curve is followed without resistance, the current becomes indistinguishable from peace. He steps into the water. It accepts him without sound. And as he sinks beneath the surface, his flame does not extinguish. It spreads, shimmering like bioluminescence beneath the waves. The river glows for a moment, then stills, as if nothing had happened. Above, the stars look on, patient and ancient. Below, the current whispers its eternal refrain. All things return, all things are carried, all things become the river. There was once a forest so vast that its shadows seemed to hold the world together. Its canopy stretched like a second sky, and its roots drank from forgotten rivers that glowed with dreamlight. Birds sang in harmonies that carried wisdom older than speech, and for a time it seemed the forest would last forever. Then came the fire. It began with a spark, a careless flicker from the storming heavens, a sigh of wind through dry leaves. The flame was small, almost innocent, but fire, like memory, spreads quickly when it finds something that yearns to be remembered. Soon the forest blazed. Trees became pillars of light, ash fell like grey snow, and the air trembled with the heat of transformation. And amidst that golden storm of ruin, the lich appeared. Pause. He did not start the fire nor seek to stop it. He stood among the embers, silent, as branches collapsed around him in slow, glowing arcs. The light reflected in the green hollows of his skull, flickering like distant thoughts. The lich had seen many kinds of ending, quiet deaths, gentle surrenders, peaceful dissolutions. But fire was different. Fire did not surrender. It consumed, and in consuming, revealed what was hidden. He watched as the flames devoured the ancient oaks and thought, "This is not destruction. This is remembrance made visible." Pause. For what is flame, if not the ghost of everything that ever reached toward the sun? Every burning tree was a confession, a brief return to light before darkness claimed it. And so the lich began to see the fire not as death, but as revelation, the unveiling of what lies beneath form, the release of what was trapped within wood, leaf, and breath. He extended one bony hand toward the inferno. The heat licked against him, but it did not harm him. Fire recognizes its kin. Both are transformations in motion. the turning of substance into essence. The Lich whispered,
"You too are a philosopher." The flames flickered in reply.
crackling softly as if in agreement. He continued, "You teach that all things must become their light before they fade. You are the truth that hides inside beauty's skin." The fire swayed, its embers rising like golden prayers into the smoke-dark sky hems. He walked through the blaze unharmed, his robe trailing sparks that turned to ash mid-air. Everywhere he stepped, the flames dimmed for a moment, bowing like disciples. He listened to their roar, the wild symphony of transformation. And beneath the chaos he heard something else, a low hum, steady and eternal. It was the same hum he had heard beneath the stars and in the current of the endless river. The hum of balance. The Lich understood then. Fire,
River, silence, death. All were expressions of the same stillness wearing different masks.
Fire was silence made visible through motion. It burned not to destroy, but to reveal that there is nothing to destroy. Pause. As he walked, he came upon a clearing untouched by flame. At its center stood a single tree, blackened but unburned, its bark etched with faint, golden veins that pulsed like slow lightning. It was alive, but barely. The fire circled it, uncertain, almost reverent. The Lich approached. He touched the tree's trunk, and a voice whispered in his mind, ancient, weary, and kind. "I have burned 1,000 times," it said,
"and still I stand. Why will I not end?"
The Lich replied softly, "Because you remember too much. The fire cannot consume what has already become light." The tree seemed to sigh, its branches trembling. "Then what am I?" The Lich looked upon it with a gaze that saw beyond time. "You are memory turned into patience." Pause. He stayed there as the fire died around them. Ash settled gently upon the earth like snowfall. The forest was gone. Yet in its place rose a quiet more profound than life itself. The Lich knelt and scooped a handful of ash. It was warm, soft, fragrant, with the ghosts of what had been. He let it drift through his fingers and said, "This is not loss. This is language, the universe writing in dust." For every flake of ash was a syllable of remembrance, every ember a punctuation mark in the sentence of existence. The forest had not vanished. It had merely changed its grammar. Pause. Days or perhaps centuries passed. From the ashes, sprouts began to emerge, green, tender, reaching again for the same sun that had once devoured them. The Lich watched, and in the gentle rhythm of their unfurling leaves, he felt something close to awe. Life's persistence was not defiance, it was participation. Every new leaf carried the memory of its own burning. He thought, even rebirth is a form of remembrance. Nothing begins without recalling how it ended. And so when mortals later feared fire as the Lich's herald, as the destroyer's touch, they misunderstood its purpose. Fire was not his servant, it was his teacher. For even he, philosopher of death, had to learn that annihilation is only another kind of transformation. Pause. There are stories told in hushed tones of a village that once burned beneath a green flame. They say the Lich passed through and the fire did not consume the living. Instead, it burned their fears, their lies, their attachments. When dawn came, the people stood unscathed amid the ash, their eyes clear as mirrors. They wept, not from pain, but from the unbearable beauty of having been purified. The elders later said that the fire had no name. It came from no spark and left no smoke. It was as though the world itself had decided to remember its essence, and so it was called the fire that forgot its name, Oz. The Lich returned to that place often. The villagers did not fear him. They brought offerings, not of gold or grain, but of silence. They would sit beside him at twilight, listening to the wind move through the charred trees, and feel within themselves the strange comfort of endings. One child once asked him, "Will the fire come again?" The Lich turned his hollow eyes toward her and said, "The fire never left. It lives in your breath, in your words, in the warmth of your heart. It waits only for you to remember." She
nodded, too young to understand but wise enough to feel the truth.
and the Lich, for the briefest moment, felt something like tenderness, a flicker of compassion, born from the memory of warmth. Oz. He wandered on after that, leaving behind the forest that now slept beneath a carpet of new life. Wherever he went, embers followed him, not as destruction but as silent witnesses. In the ruins of time, he found that fire was the universe's reminder. Nothing is truly lost. Everything returns to light, sometimes softly, sometimes as flame. He began to ponder the nature of memory itself. If the forest could be reborn, if fire could forget its name and still burn, perhaps even he, the eternal end, was not beyond renewal. He thought, what is the Lich but a memory of death that refuses to die? The idea lingered like smoke. Could even the embodiment of endings find transformation? Could even death learn to forget itself? Oz. The stars above began to shimmer, their reflections dancing in the black pools left by the rain. The Lich gazed upward, feeling the rhythm of the cosmos beating faintly within his chest, a pulse not of life, but of awareness. He whispered, "If fire can remember, then perhaps I can forget." He closed his eyes, and for a moment the night itself seemed to breathe. A soft wind moved through the charred branches, carrying with it the scent of renewal, the fragrance of things returning to themselves. And within that breath, the Lich felt the first trace of peace. Not the peace of finality, but of transformation. The peace that comes when even death understands it is not alone. So pause. As dawn touched the horizon, the first rays of sunlight fell upon the ashes. They glittered faintly like a field of stars reborn on the ground. The Lich turned away, his form fading into the mist, and the world exhaled in his absence. In the wake of his passage, a single spark remained, small, steady, alive. It flickered once, then twice, then caught the breeze and vanished into the morning light. And if one listened closely, they might have heard his whisper carried with it. All things burn to remember what they are. There is a place where even the wind forgets to wander, a place so quiet that sound itself grows weary and lies down to rest. The sky there is not blue or grey, but the colour of old parchment, faded, thoughtful, endless. It is said that all things, no matter how great or small, eventually drift here in the form of dust. And it is said that the Lich calls this place home. Hordius. He arrived long before the first mortals ever dreamed of death. Back then, the kingdom of dust was not yet a kingdom, only a vast plain where forgotten things came to wait. Mountains worn to powder, ruins crumbled to whispers, even the ghosts of thoughts too fragile to survive, all gathered there, seeking a final silence. The Lich walked among them, his steps leaving no mark, for dust yields to everything and resists nothing. He found comfort in this. After fire, after flood, after the long and weary centuries of watching life return again and again, he desired stillness. And so he built no throne, no temple, no monument. He simply existed among the remains, like a thought that had ceased to need words. Pause. Yet the dust was not lifeless. It shimmered faintly under the ghost light of unseen stars. Each grain carried the echo of something that once was: a memory of rain, a sigh of laughter, a glimmer of bone. And when the lich moved, the dust rose softly around him, swirling like spirits greeting an old friend. He began to listen. For dust, too, speaks, though not in language mortals would recognize. It speaks in patterns, in the slow dance of drifting.
Motes in the quiet rhythm of settling and rising again.
As he watched, he began to see that every grain was not a remnant, but a seed, a possibility folded into silence. And he thought, if dust holds the memory of what was, then perhaps it also holds the dream of what will be. Pause. One day, or perhaps one eternity, the lich encountered a shape in the dunes. It was a statue, half buried, its features softened by time. He brushed the sand away and found the faint outline of a face carved in stone, serene, unafraid, eyes closed in eternal meditation. He did not recognize it, yet something within him stirred. It felt like remembering something he had never known. He knelt before the statue. In the language of dust, he asked, "Who are you?" And in the silence that followed, the wind awoke for the first time in an age. It carried a whisper so faint that only a being as ancient as he could hear it. "I am what you were before you forgot your beginning." The lich's hollow eyes glowed faintly like lanterns rekindled in fog. He understood then that this place, this kingdom, was not merely his home. It was his origin. The dust was the first thing that had ever known him, and perhaps when all cycles end, it would be the last. As he rose, and as he did, the dunes around him began to shift. Shapes formed, towers of grey powder, arches of soft erosion, the silhouettes of cities that had long ceased to exist. It was as if the world remembered itself, one particle at a time. He walked through these phantom streets, past walls that crumbled as he touched them. The dust whispered its stories of kings who sought eternity, of lovers who built empires from dreams, of stars that died singing. And through it all, he felt a strange tenderness. Every ruin was a confession, every collapse a kind of prayer. Is this, he wondered, what creation looks like from the other side? Pause. For even dust is faithful. It waits. It does not resist the hand of time, nor the breath of wind. It accepts all things, transforms them, and gives them back in silence. And in that silence lies a wisdom deeper than eternity, the wisdom of letting go. The lich sat among the dunes and allowed the dust to cover him. Layer upon layer, it gathered until his shape was lost to the horizon. For days or centuries, he remained still. He felt the weight of ages pressing upon him, soft, gentle, unjudging. And within that stillness, he heard something new. Not the hum of balance this time, but a pulse, faint like the heartbeat of the world itself. It was the sound of existence inhaling and exhaling, the rhythm that keeps even nothingness alive. He whispered, "So even the void breathes." Pause. He began to understand that death is not the opposite of life. It is its shadow, its reflection, its companion in the eternal dance. Wherever one goes, the other follows, not as enemy, but as guide. The kingdom of dust was proof of this truth. The end is never empty. It is full of beginnings waiting to be remembered. And so the Lich stood again, his form shedding the layers of grey like old skin. The dust rose in spirals around him, glowing faintly in the unseen light. He lifted a handful of it, letting it trickle through his fingers. Each grain caught the air and vanished, but none were truly gone. He thought, perhaps this is how the universe renews itself. One sigh at a time. Pause. He walked for what felt like an age, deeper into the endless expanse, until he came to a place where the dunes met the sea. It was not water that moved there, but dust flowing like liquid silver, rippling in slow, hypnotic waves. The horizon shimmered, a mirage, or perhaps a promise. The Lich stood at its edge and looked down into the shifting surface. His reflection stared back at him, but not as he expected. It was not skeletal, nor cloaked, nor cold. It was the faint outline of a man, eyes filled with curiosity. Face soft and alive. For a long while, he simply watched. He did not recognize this version of himself, yet he felt no fear. He reached out, and as his finger touched the reflection, the image rippled and dissolved into starlight. He whispered, "So that is who I was, or who I might become again." The dust sea sighed as though in approval. Pause. He turned away and began to walk back through the desert of memory. Each step stirred stories beneath his feet. Old worlds, lost gods, forgotten songs. But none clung to him. They simply rose, shimmered, and fell again, like blessings that ask for nothing in return. He began to feel lighter, as though he too was becoming dust, a thought unburdened by form. And in that dissolution there was freedom. He mused, "To dissolve is to belong to everything." Pause. When the first wind returned, soft, hesitant, it carried whispers of the living world.
Echoes of laughter, the rustle of leaves, there were the distant cries of newborns.
The Lich listened, and for the first time he felt something akin to longing. Not to live again, but to understand life from within its fragility. He had seen so much of endings, perhaps now he wished to glimpse what beginnings felt like, and so he decided to leave the kingdom of dust. He turned back once, gazing over the quiet expanse that shimmered under invisible stars. He bowed, not out of reverence, but gratitude, for it had shown him the holiness of stillness, the beauty of release, the secret that even endings pray. Pause. As he walked toward the horizon, the dust began to rise in gentle spirals behind him, forming shapes almost like wings. He did not notice, or perhaps he did, and simply chose not to name them. For names are anchors, and he was learning to drift. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, glowing softly under the breath of unseen moons. And as the Lich disappeared into the haze, the kingdom of dust fell silent once more, but not empty. Within its silence now lived a question, whispered by every grain. There are places not bound by distance, but by remembrance. Places that do not exist in time, but beneath it, like roots hidden below the surface of a sleeping world. One such place is the mirror beneath time. Few have ever reached it. Fewer still have dared to look. Pause. The Lich arrived there without knowing he had crossed any threshold. He had walked from the kingdom of dust into what appeared to be a vast lake of glass, perfectly still, perfectly clear. The sky above was unmoving, a twilight that neither deepened nor brightened, suspended between moments. No wind disturbed the surface. No echo followed his steps. It was as if the world had forgotten to breathe. He leaned over the glassy expanse and gazed downward. What he saw was not his reflection. There was no bone, no cloak, no deathly green. Instead, the surface shimmered with countless versions of himself, not as the Lich, but as what he had once been, what he might become, and what he could never be again. A child tracing constellations in sand. A scholar bent over a candle's flame.
A warrior laying down his sword and weeping. A god made humble.
A ghost made kind. The mirror showed them all. Infinite faces, infinite lifetimes. Each blinked, breathed and turned, as if aware of being seen. Pause. He knelt at the edge and whispered, "Are you my past or my future?" The reflections did not answer. They only stared back, their gazes calm and knowing, and in that silence he began to feel the slow unraveling of the one thing he had always thought unchangeable, his own certainty. For eternity had made him proud. He believed he understood the pattern: life, death, rebirth, decay. But here, in this mirror, he saw something deeper, a cycle not of bodies but of awareness. Each reflection was not a different being, but a different understanding of the same being. The child saw wonder. The scholar saw meaning. The Lich saw endings.
And together they formed a truth that could not be spoken, only felt, like a heartbeat echoing across time. Oh. He reached out.
The surface rippled softly beneath his skeletal hand, distorting the infinite faces into waves of light. When the ripples settled, the reflection that remained was not his own. It was the face of a woman, serene, radiant, timeless. Her eyes held galaxies, and yet they were kind. When she spoke, her voice sounded not in air, but in the spaces between his thoughts. "You have come far," she said. "But do you know why?" The Lich hesitated. Words came to him like echoes of an old memory. "I seek the end of endings," she smiled gently. "There is no such thing," he frowned, or tried to, though his skull could not move. "And what is death, if not that?" The woman's reflection tilted her head. "Death is a mirror. You have mistaken your own reflection for truth." The Lich looked down again. The surface shimmered, and he saw it clearly now. Every soul, every creature, every thought that had ever existed was reflected there, looping endlessly through lives and dreams. Each believed itself unique. Each believed it ended. And yet, each was only light, flickering in a cosmic reflection too vast to comprehend. He whispered, "Then what am I?" The woman's voice was soft as snowfall.
You are the question that forgot it was an answer. Silence stretched between them, gentle as breath. The Lich bowed his head.
In that moment, something like humility returned to him, an emotion he hadn't felt since before he became the end of all things. He asked, "If there is no final end, why do I exist?" Her gaze deepened, as though she were looking through him and beyond him, because even eternity needs to remember how to listen. Pause. The words echoed through him like a bell rung inside the soul. He felt them vibrate across the endless halls of his memory. It was not accusation nor praise, merely truth. The Lich realized that his purpose had never been destruction. It was observation. He was the pause between creation's breaths, the silence that made the song of existence possible. He whispered, "Then all I have taken, still lives?" The woman smiled. "Nothing you touch is lost. You only remind it of its formlessness." Her image began to fade, dissolving into waves of light that rippled outward. Soon the surface stilled again, and only his reflection remained. Silent, calm, infinite pause. He sat by the mirror for what might have been eons. He watched the reflections drift and merge, watched lifetimes overlap like waves upon a shore. He saw birth and decay, joy and despair, gods and mortals repeating their stories across the silver surface. And in every one of them he recognized himself, not as the cause, but as the witness. He was the memory of all that is impermanent. And even memory, he realized, is sacred. For what is remembrance if not love refusing to let go? Pause. The Lich looked up at the unmoving twilight. He thought of the forest of fire, the kingdom of dust, the silent river, and the breathing void. Each had shown him a face of truth. Now this mirror revealed the unity behind them all. There is no beginning, no end, only reflection upon reflection. The universe remembering itself, he stood.
As he did, the surface of the mirror began to tremble.
The stillness cracked, not violently, but like ice melting at dawn. Ripples spread in slow, concentric rings, and from the center rose a shape. A perfect circle of light, pulsing softly. The Lich reached out to touch it. The moment his hand made contact, the circle expanded, and time itself began to move again. Pause. He saw centuries bloom and fade in an instant.
Mountains rose and crumbled.
Stars ignited and dissolved. Civilizations dreamed themselves into being, only to be forgotten. And through it all, the mirror reflected each moment, flawless, compassionate, eternal. He felt no fear,
only wonder.
He had walked across ages seeking the final truth, and now he understood there was no truth apart from awareness itself. To see, to witness, that was enough. He whispered, "To reflect is to exist." The mirror shimmered once more, then broke apart, scattering into countless points of light. They rose into the air like fireflies, surrounding him in a quiet constellation. And as the last fragment faded, the twilight sky deepened into true night. The Lich stood alone once more, but no longer untouched. Something within him had softened, though he could not name it. Perhaps it was humility. Perhaps it was peace. He began to walk again, though there was no direction to follow. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if he was walking not on the world, but within it. Pause. Far behind him, where the mirror beneath time once lay, the silver surface had become a tranquil sea once more. But those who dream deeply enough, it is said, can still glimpse it, a reflection not of what is, but of what is aware, and if they listen closely, they might hear a voice calm as moonlight, whispering from beneath the ripples, "All that you see is yourself remembering." Pause. The Lich paused, his unseen breath mingling with the silence of eternity. He looked toward the horizon. Though there was no sun, only a pale glow like the memory of dawn. He began to move toward it. As he walked, the darkness ahead softened, opening like a curtain to reveal a faint shimmer of gold. The Lich followed it without question. For the first time in endless ages, he did not seek to understand. He simply allowed himself to follow the light. There are whispers among the stars that the universe was never created at all. It was dreamed by something that had forgotten what waking meant. And when that dream grew too beautiful to end, it began to dream of itself. This is where the Lich now walked, within that dream. Pause. The horizon was not solid, but shifting, as though woven from thought. Mountains rose and fell like sleeping giants breathing. The air shimmered with half-formed memories of things that might have been. Faces, laughter, starlight, and rain. Every sound was both near and distant, every scent familiar yet unplaceable. Here, existence was not bound by logic or law. Here, ideas cast shadows, and shadows whispered truths. The Lich stepped carefully, though the ground was not ground at all, but a slow current of meaning. With each movement, he left behind no footprints, only ripples of awareness that faded like sighs. He spoke softly to the dream. Where does thought end and the world begin? The air shimmered, and in reply, 1,000 voices murmured as one. Wherever you decide to stop listening, pause. He paused, feeling the strange truth of that answer vibrate through him. All his life, all his unending existence, he had sought knowledge through endings, believing that truth was what remained after everything else was gone. But here, in this boundless reverie, he saw that knowledge itself was an illusion, the dream trying to make sense of itself through mirrors. He closed his eyes and listened. Beneath the soft hum of the cosmos he heard it, the heartbeat of the dreamer. Slow, vast, patient. It was not his own, nor was it separate from him. He realized, with something like awe, that he was hearing the pulse of existence itself, the rhythm of being dreaming itself into countless forms. He whispered, "So even I am part of the dream." The silence smiled back, and within it a single thought echoed. Did you ever believe you were not? Pause. The Lich began to walk again, though he no longer knew what it meant to move. Each step was both forward and backward, both now and never. Dreams do not have direction. They unfold like flowers, layer upon layer of meaning. He came upon a field of black flowers that glowed faintly from within. Their petals were shaped like eyes, and each one blinked slowly as he passed. They whispered names, not of people, but of feelings long forgotten. Awe, reverence, stillness, forgiveness. The Lich paused before one flower, larger than the rest. It opened, revealing within it a pool of silver light. He looked into it and saw himself again, but this time not as bone or being. He was a thought, vast, luminous, endless. The realization felt both humbling and freeing. He thought, if I am only a thought, then perhaps even death is a dream the universe tells itself. And in that moment, the pool rippled. A voice rose from its depths, soft as moonlight touching water. You are not the end, it said. You are the space where endings rest. The Lich listened, unmoving. The words sank into him like seeds falling into fertile soil. He felt them take root. For so long he had carried the title of destroyer, the harbinger of silence. But now he saw that even silence is part of the song. Without rest, there can be no rhythm. Without death, no meaning to birth. Pause. The dream began to shift around him. The flowers folded inward, their light dimming. Above, the stars rearranged themselves into great spirals that pulsed with quiet intent. He realized he was no longer walking through a landscape. He was walking through a mind, and that mind was his own. Every sight, every whisper, every flicker of light was an echo of himself, reflecting back from the endless mirror of being. He was the dreamer and the dream, the watcher and the watched. He asked softly, then what of purpose? What of meaning if all is reflection? The stars pulsed in answer, their light-forming words across the vast sky. Meaning is not found. It is chosen. Every dream chooses itself. Pause. The Lich stood in silence, absorbing the enormity of that truth. He thought of all the worlds he had watched fade, all the lives that had dissolved into dust and returned again as something new. Perhaps none of them had been lost. Perhaps they were simply dreaming new forms into being, again and again, without ever truly ceasing. He whispered, "Then even death is creative." The dream shivered, as if in laughter. "Yes," it replied, "for what is creation but forgetting done beautifully?" He understood. To create is to forget that one was ever whole, to scatter into pieces of light, to lose oneself so completely that finding oneself again becomes the joy of eternity. And death, his own essence, was simply the closing of an eyelid before the next awakening. He walked further, until he reached the heart of the dream, a vast sphere of light suspended in darkness, like the moon caught in a cosmic breath. Within it, shapes flickered, fragments of every world, every soul, every thought that had ever existed. He recognized them all, though he had never seen them before. The sphere pulsed once, and a voice emerged, neither male nor female, but the echo of all things speaking at once. "Do you understand now?" it asked. The Lich lowered his head. "Yes," he said. "You are the dreamer." The voice replied, "I am, and I am not. I am what dreams itself into you." He felt that truth settle in him like a gentle tide. The dreamer and the dream were inseparable, the universe imagining itself through infinite perspectives, one of which happened to be the Lich. He asked one last question. "Then will I ever wake?" The light pulsed softly, when the dream no longer needs to be dreamed. Until then, rest within it. Even endings must learn to sleep. Pause. The Lich felt the weight of countless eons lift from him. For the first time since the dawn of endings, he felt no burden to destroy, no hunger to conclude. He simply existed, not as death, but as presence. The light expanded, wrapping around him like a warm shroud. He closed his hollow eyes and let himself dissolve into it. In that dissolution, he felt everything. The stars' birth cries, the laughter of rivers, the ache of forgotten gods, the dreams of mortals sleeping under fragile roofs. It was all him, and he was all of it, Oz. When the light faded, he stood once more upon a quiet plain. The dream had receded, leaving behind only stillness and a sky full of patient stars. He looked around, realizing that nothing had changed, yet everything had. The Lich smiled, though no mouth could show it. He whispered to the sleeping world, "I understand now. To dream is to be alive." He turned toward the horizon, where a faint shimmer awaited, the threshold to the next truth, the next reflection, the next silence that would speak. He began to walk again, the sound of his steps blending with the pulse of creation itself. Each echo was softer than the last, until finally, even silence forgot it was silence. In the hush between worlds, where memory drifts like mist through hollow streets, there lies a city that no longer remembers its name. It is said that once every god who had ever been worshipped walked here, their laughter filling the marble courtyards, their wisdom echoing through endless halls. Now, only wind and time inhabit those corridors. The Lich arrived as twilight folded itself over the horizon. The city appeared not as ruin, but as a reflection, columns glimmering faintly as though made from moonlight captured in glass. He moved through the silent avenues, and each step stirred a whisper from the stones below. It was not language, but the residue of reverence, a lingering sense that once something vast and kind had lived here. Above him, statues of gods leaned from their plinths, their faces worn smooth by eternity. Eyes that once glowed with omniscience now stared blankly into nothing. Some had lost their arms, some their crowns, but all still seemed to listen, as though waiting for a prayer that would never again be spoken. Oz. The Lich walked beneath their gaze, and though he was made of endings, he felt reverence. He wondered what it meant for a god to die, not in body, for gods were not flesh, but in memory. Could a being of worship cease when its believers stopped believing? Could eternity fade if forgotten long enough? He stopped before a temple shaped like an open hand, its fingers reaching toward the sky. Inside, shadows fluttered like birds made of thought. Upon the altar lay offerings that had turned to dust, coins, feathers, tears. He touched one. It crumbled into nothingness, and then from the silence came a voice, soft, weary, and infinitely old. "You have come late," it said. The Lich turned. From the far side of the temple emerged a figure, faint, translucent, a shimmer of divine residue. It had no face, only presence. When it spoke, it sounded like many voices trying to remember how to be one. "You are one of those who end things," the voice said. "Why don't you walk among the remnants of beginnings?" The Lich bowed his head. "I seek to understand what lies beyond ending. What happens when even gods fall silent?" The figure smiled, or something like it. "When the last prayer fades, we do not die. We become echoes of ourselves."
Memory without mouths, meaning without motion. The Lich considered this. Then even gods must be sustained by thought? Yes, the figure replied.
"We are as real as belief allows. But belief is fragile. Mortals create us to mirror what they fear or love. When they evolve, we fade. When they forget, we vanish. When they dream anew, we return in different forms." It moved closer, its shape flickering between forms, now winged, now crowned, now faceless. "I have been worshipped as flame, as storm, as silence, but now I am only the shadow of what once was." The Lich reached out. His skeletal fingers passed through the god's essence like mist. "What remains of you, then?" "Awareness," said the god. "A faint warmth, not of power, but of memory. We linger not for ourselves, but for the comfort of existence."
Even forgotten gods dream of being known again. Pause. They stood together in the vast hollow of the temple.
Around them, motes of dust drifted in the pale light like ancient prayers that had lost their words. The Lich felt something stir within him, not pity, but recognition. For he too was shaped by memory. He too was given purpose by belief. The belief that all things must end. Perhaps, he thought, even the Lich himself was a god. The god of finality, created by the universe's own fear of continuation. He turned to the fading figure. "Do you resent being forgotten?" The god's form flickered like a candle in wind. No, to be remembered forever would be to never rest. Oblivion is mercy to those who have carried the burden of eternity. Pause. They walked together through the streets of the city of forgotten gods. At every corner, they passed altars of vanished faiths, shrines to rain spirits, laughter spirits, shadows that once danced in candlelight. And though the city was silent, it pulsed faintly, as if the stones themselves were dreaming of voices long gone. The Lich listened closely, and in the hum beneath the silence, he began to hear stories. The whisper of a storm deity who once guided sailors, the murmur of a harvest goddess who watched over 1,000 fields, the laughter of a trickster who taught mortals joy in chaos. Each whisper was a thread in the great tapestry of existence, a reminder that no god, no idea, no soul is ever truly gone. They merely shift form, awaiting rediscovery in a new tongue, a new sky, a new child's question. Pause. At last they came upon the city's centre, a vast amphitheatre open to the heavens. In its heart stood a throne made of broken mirrors. Upon it sat no one. "This," said the fading god, "is the seat of the first memory, the idea that created all others." The Lich gazed at the empty throne. He saw in it a reflection of himself, and beyond that, of everything that ever was. It was not emptiness he saw, but potential. The stillness before creation, the silence before the first note of the universe was sung. He whispered, "Who sat here?" The god's voice softened to a whisper. "No one knows. Perhaps it was the dreamer you met. Perhaps it was the first thought to wonder, why am I? Or perhaps it was the Lich himself before he became what he is." The Lich stared longer. In the cracked reflections, he saw countless faces flicker. Mortals, gods, beasts, stars, all overlapping, all existing for a heartbeat before dissolving into one another. He realized that the throne was not empty at all. It contained everything that had ever been imagined. He asked quietly, "Then why does no one sit upon it now?" The god smiled faintly. "Because no one truly rules meaning."
"Meaning rules us all." Pause. The Lich bowed his head.
In that moment, the city of forgotten gods seemed to exhale, as if relieved to have been seen once more. Columns shimmered, statues stirred in faint memory, and a soft golden wind carried the faintest murmur of old hymns through the air. It was not resurrection, but remembrance, the gentlest kind of rebirth. He turned to the fading god. "What will become of you now?" "I will fade as I was meant to," it said, "but I will linger as a note in your thought, a reminder that even forgotten things are sacred." The Lich inclined his head, honoring the divinity within the silence. As the figure vanished into the shimmering dust, the Lich felt no sorrow, only gratitude. For even endings could be beautiful when embraced, not resisted. Pause. As he walked away from the city, he glanced back one final time. The skyline glowed faintly against the starless void, each ruined tower a candle lit for the gods of yesterday. He whispered to the quiet, "Nothing is truly forgotten. It merely sleeps within the memory of time." And the city, though silent, seemed to nod in agreement. For even in the realm of endings, belief never dies, or it only dreams. Pause. The Lich continued his journey. The road ahead shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the stars that were not there. He did not walk to destroy now, but to understand, to listen. For he had learned that death itself is not a thief, but a librarian, returning stories to the shelf of eternity, where someday someone will open them again. The dream deepened, and the next world began to whisper through the veil of sleep. There are mirrors scattered throughout creation. Some are made of glass, others of memory, and some, the rarest of all, are made of truth. It was one such mirror that waited for the Lich at the end of the road. Pause. The air around him grew still, as though the universe itself held its breath. Ahead, an endless plain unfolded, smooth as black water, silent as the thought before dawn. At its center stood a single mirror taller than mountains, its surface rippling like living mercury. It reflected nothing. The stars above did not appear upon it. The Lich himself, though standing before it, cast no image. Only the faint shimmer of awareness trembled within its depths, as if the mirror were watching him rather than the other way around. He approached slowly. Each step echoed like the closing of a door. He had faced countless ends, countless reflections of decay, but never one that refused to show him anything at all. He raised a hand, skeletal fingers trembling slightly as they met the cool surface. It was neither solid nor liquid, neither warm nor cold.
It was understanding.
The sensation of being seen completely, down to the last thought. The Lich spoke softly, his voice swallowed by the vast quiet. "What are you?" The mirror rippled.
and then it spoke, though not in words.
Its voice entered him as feeling, deep, steady, ancient. It said, "I am the truth that does not need eyes to be seen." Pause. The Lich lowered his hand.
"And show me myself," he said. The mirror pulsed gently. "I cannot."
For to be seen, one must first exist apart. You are not apart from me.
"You are the stillness that allows reflection to happen." He frowned, or rather, thought of frowning. "I do not understand." "You will?" the mirror replied.
But first, listen. The mirror began to shimmer more intensely. Ripples formed across its vast surface, and within them scenes began to flicker. Memories.
Not of the Lich's life, but of existence itself. He saw the first spark of creation, a sigh of light blooming into form.
He saw the birth of stars, the first laughter of rivers, the first thought of love. He saw beings rise and fade, their joy and sorrow intertwining like threads of silver and shadow. And through it all, one constant presence flowed, a dark, patient awareness, waiting at the edges of every transformation. Himself. He watched as he moved through countless ages, as entropy, as silence, as peace, as release, not as enemy but as rhythm.
Every end was a heartbeat, every death a return. The mirror whispered, "Do you see now?"
You were never the destroyer. You were the stillness that let the song be heard. Pause. The Lich's awareness trembled. For the first time, he saw his nature not as curse, but as function, the necessary counterpart to creation's ceaseless bloom. Without him, there would be no room for new things to grow. Without him, eternity would drown in its own abundance. He asked quietly, "Then why do they fear me?" "Because they have not yet remembered that they are part of you," the mirror replied. Mortals cling to form because they confuse persistence with meaning, but all forms must dissolve, not to end, but to continue differently. You are not their doom.
You are their passage. The Lich stepped back, his mind echoing with that word. Passage.
He thought of the rivers he had seen turn to dust, the stars that had collapsed into silence, and how, somehow, their essence had always found its way into something new. He realized that endings were simply migrations, the soul of the universe moving from one vessel to another. He whispered, "Then I am not the shadow of life."
"I am its breath between." The mirror shimmered as if in agreement.
"You are the pause that lets eternity exhale." Pause. For a long time, neither spoke. The Lich stood before the mirror, feeling both smaller and larger than he had ever felt. He had been worshipped and feared, hated and misunderstood, but never until now had he been seen. Finally, he asked, "What lies beyond even me? Beyond silence, beyond stillness?" The mirror's surface stilled completely. The air became so calm it felt like the world had stopped. And then came the answer. Not in sound, but in knowing. Beyond you lies the dreamer's awakening. The Lich tilted his head.
"The dreamer?"
One who began all this. The mind that dreamed existence into being. When it awakens, all reflections end, for there will be no one left to gaze. He thought of the dream he had walked through before, the light that had told him, even endings must learn to sleep. And he understood now, he was part of that dream's rhythm. When the dreamer awoke, even the Lich would dissolve into peace. "Will that awakening ever come?" he asked. The mirror pulsed gently. "It is already happening, in every act of understanding. Every time a soul accepts change without fear, every time a star collapses gracefully into light, the dreamer stirs." The Lich bowed his head. "Then my purpose is not to hasten ending, but to teach acceptance." "Yes," said the mirror. You are not the destroyer of worlds. You are the whisper that reminds them to let go. Pause. The Lich felt something like emotion rise within him. Not joy, not sorrow, but a serene recognition. He stepped closer once more and placed his hand upon the mirror. This time, it did not feel separate from him. It felt like returning home. Slowly, the mirror's surface began to dissolve into light. The ripples spread outward, touching everything, until the plane itself shimmered away. He stood within a vast sea of illumination, and for a moment he saw no difference between himself and the light. He whispered into the endlessness, then there was never a reflection, only the act of seeing itself, and the light replied softly, "Yes." The universe has always been looking at itself. Lovingly. Pause. When the radiance faded, he found himself standing at the edge of a new world. The air was soft, scented faintly of rain and ash. Before him stretched a landscape both ancient and unborn, a place where new dreams waited to take root. He turned back once, expecting to see the mirror, but there was only open space, vast, patient,
and free. He understood now that he carried the mirror within him.
He needed no reflection to know he existed, for existence itself was reflection enough. Pause. He began to walk, and as he moved he felt the rhythm of creation pulse gently beneath his steps. It no longer resisted him. It welcomed him as one welcomes the evening, not with fear, but with gratitude. Above him the stars shone brighter than before. They did not flee from his presence as they once had. Instead, they pulsed in quiet harmony, each one whispering a single word that rippled through the fabric of eternity. Peace. The Lich did not smile, but peace smiled through him. He no longer carried the weight of being the end. He carried the stillness of understanding, and in that stillness he felt something he had not felt since before time began. The tender edge of compassion. Pause. He stopped for a moment, gazing at the horizon, a soft gradient of light and shadow blending without conflict. He whispered, as if to the listener themselves, "Do you see it now? There is no line between creation and ending, only one eternal curve of becoming." And with that he continued forward, his form dissolving slowly into the horizon's glow, his steps soundless, his presence weightless. A thought returning home to its dreamer. There is a place where light forgets its source. It drifts quietly, like the last breath of a dream that does not yet wish to end. It is not bright nor dim. It simply is, suspended between awakening and rest. It was here the Lich now stood. Pause. The horizon shimmered in gold and silver mist, as though dawn and dusk had found a way to hold each other. The air was heavy with the scent of beginnings. Rain before it falls, fruit before it ripens, memory before it is born. The world was still but not silent. There was a hum beneath everything, a resonance older than creation itself, the heartbeat of the dreamer, preparing to stir. The Lich felt it in the hollow spaces of his being, vibrating through every thread of his awareness. For eons he had feared this sound, believing it signaled the end of all things. Now he understood that it was not an ending. It was the sound of everything remembering itself. He walked slowly across the shimmering plain. Each step left no trace, yet the air rippled gently behind him, like water acknowledging a passing hand. Far ahead, a soft radiance grew brighter, as though a sun were about to rise for the very first time. He knew this place. He had seen it once before, not with eyes, but with the quiet recognition that lives beneath thought. It was the threshold he had been moving toward since before time had a name, the end of endings, the beginning of beginning pause. He approached the light and saw within it faint shapes, silhouettes of those he had once touched through death, souls, stars, memories. Each shimmered with a soft, forgiving glow. They did not fear him. They welcomed him. He paused, and the light spoke, not as voice, but as feeling. Welcome home. The words resonated through him like warmth through frost. He did not answer immediately. He only stood in stillness, watching as the figures within the light moved closer. He saw a child once lost to the tides of time, a tree that had burned and been reborn as a forest, a god who had faded into laughter, and a dream that had once been a world. All of them gathered here. Radiant with calm, he understood then nothing was truly gone. Everything he had ever ended had simply come here, to this resting place of light, where form dissolves into peace, and peace prepares to become form again. Pause. The light pulsed softly, and the feeling of love, vast, formless, ungraspable, flowed into him. It did not come from another. It came from everywhere, from everything. The Lich whispered, "So this is where it all returns." "Yes," the light replied, "and this is where it all begins again." He lowered his head. "I have spent eternity taking away." "And in doing so," said the light, "you have made room for eternity to continue." He felt no pride, no guilt, only a serene acceptance that washed through him like moonlight over still water. He understood at last that his role had never been about destruction, but about balance, the gentle closing of a chapter so another might begin. Pause. He looked deeper into the light, and within its glow he saw something vast, the outline of the dreamer. It was not a figure, but an idea, presence without boundary, awareness without form. It shimmered like infinity remembering itself. The Lich felt a tremor of awe ripple through his essence.
"Are you the one who dreamed?"
he asked softly, and the light replied, "I am dreaming still, but the dream is beginning to wake." He listened to those words with quiet reverence. "What will happen when you awaken?" The light paused, as though considering something tender and ancient. "When I wake, all reflections will fade. Not into nothing, but into me, then I too will fade." The light's warmth deepened. "You will not fade. You will be remembered as silence, the peace within which all things rest. You will not be lost.
"You will be fulfilled." The Lich stood in stillness, letting those words settle into him like dawn through mist.
He looked back once more at the endless expanse behind him, the long trail of stars, dreams, and forgotten songs that stretched into the infinite. He had walked through life, death, gods, and thought itself. He had sought the meaning of ending, only to find that meaning was the one thing that could never end. He turned again toward the light. It pulsed gently, invitingly, like a door left open for one who has been away too long. He whispered, "Then I am ready." The light answered, "You always were." And with that, the Lich stepped forward. As he entered the radiance, his form began to dissolve, not painfully, not in loss, but in the deep, wordless joy of returning home. He felt himself expanding, merging, becoming the spaces between light and darkness, the breath between creation and silence. Every life he had touched flickered through him one last time. Every sigh, every tear, every final heartbeat, each one a note in the great song of existence.
And as the final echo faded, he realized there had never been death, only transformation, the dreamer stirred.
The universe exhaled. The first sound of awakening shimmered through the stillness, not a roar, but a sigh of infinite peace. The Lich's voice, soft, fading, whispered into the growing dawn, "May all things return gently. May even endings sleep kindly." And with that, he became the silence he had once feared.
Not empty, but whole. The dreamer's eye opened.
And within that awakening, the light became everything. The last light before awakening lingered for a moment longer, a reminder to those who dream still, that even the end has a heart, and within that heart, the beginning always waits.